Story 1. The Playback. I live in a duplex, a thin-walled box where I can hear my neighbor cough through the plasterboard like he's standing right next to me. I'm used to the noise, the settling pipes, the traffic on the avenue, the hum of the refrigerator that kicks on every 20 minutes. But tonight, the silence felt heavy. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a pressure. Like the air in the hallway had turned into solid plastic and was pushing against my eardrums. It was 2 a.m. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, not reading anything, just letting the blue light wash over my face. I heard a creak from the upstairs hallway. It was a specific sound, the third step from the top, the one that always groans when the weather changes. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. I don't have roommates. I don't have pets. It's just me. I held my breath, listening. The house settled back into silence. I told myself it was the wood shrinking in the cold snap we had tonight. I told myself it was the wind. Then I heard it again. But this time, I was looking right at the staircase. I didn't hear the wood. I heard the impact before the wood could have made it. It was a heavy, hollow thud, like a boot landing on the floorboards, but the sound came a split second before the floorboard actually reacted. It was like watching a movie with the audio track out of sync. The foot landed, then the floor creaked. I stood up slowly, my knees popping in the quiet. The air in the hallway felt colder than the living room, a stagnant draft that smelled like old dust and drywall. "Hello?" I whispered. My voice sounded thin, pathetic against the heavy silence. Nothing. I walked to the bottom of the stairs. They went up at a sharp angle, turning left at a small landing to the second floor. The darkness up there was total. The motion sensor light, the one I installed in the hallway ceiling last month, was off. It should have tripped. The sound was loud enough to trigger it. I stared up into the black square of the landing. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, the primal instinct that tells you when you are being watched. I wasn't being watched by a pair of eyes, though. It felt like the house itself was observing me. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the block. Not because I thought a burglar had broken in, but because I needed something sharp, something to define the space. I walked back to the stairs. I didn't turn on the hallway light. I didn't want to see what might be standing in it. I just listened. I heard a shuffle, the sound of fabric brushing against the drywall. It was coming from the upstairs hallway. It was slow, deliberate. Then I heard another sound, my own voice. "I'm coming up," I heard myself say, but my mouth was shut. The panic hit me then, not a spike of adrenaline, but a cold, spreading numbness. I had thought about going up the stairs. I had formed the words in my head. "I'm going up," but I hadn't spoken them. The house had heard the thought before I could execute it, and it had played the audio for me. I backed away, the knife gripped tight in my sweating hand. "I'm coming up," the voice said again. It was clearer this time, coming from the top of the stairs. It was my voice, but it lacked the hesitation, the fear. It was calm, resigned. I ran to the front door. My hand was shaking so bad I couldn't get the key in the deadbolt on the first try. The metal scratched against the brass, a screeching sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. I looked over my shoulder. The darkness at the top of the stairs was moving. It wasn't a shadow. It was a patch of nothingness, a void where the light should have been, and it was sliding down the banister like oil. I finally got the key in. I turned it. I threw the door open and stumbled out onto the lawn, the cold night air hitting my face like a splash of water. I slammed the door behind me and locked it from the outside. I stood on the grass, breathing hard, looking at the dark rectangle of my front window. I waited for the lights to turn on inside. I waited for the silhouette to pass the curtain. Nothing happened. The house was still. The silence was back, pressing against the glass. I looked down at my hand. I was still holding the knife. I looked at the reflection in the window glass. The reflection of the window showed the kitchen behind me. And in the kitchen, standing by the sink, was a figure. It was me. It was holding the knife. It was looking straight at the back of my head. I turned around. The kitchen was empty. I looked back at the window. The reflection was still there. It raised the knife and tapped the glass gently. Tap, tap. I didn't hear the sound from inside. I heard it in my ear. "You forgot to say goodbye," the voice whispered. I ran to my car and didn't stop driving until the sun came up. Story 2. The Visitor. I've lived in the third-floor walk-up for 3 years. It's a pre-war building with thick radiators and drafty windows. I like the solitude. I like the fact that the only way in is the heavy front door and the fire escape that rattles when the wind blows. But for the last week, things have been moving. It started small. I'd come home from work and find a cup on the counter. I don't drink tea. I don't own a cup like that. It was ceramic, white with a blue rim. I'd wash it and put it in the sink. The next day, it would be back on the counter, dry and clean. Then it was the chair. The armchair in the living room faces the television. I always sit in the left side of the couch. One night I came home, and the chair was pulled out, angled toward the door, like someone had been sitting there waiting for me to walk in. I didn't feel scared, just unsettled, like I was sharing the apartment with a ghost who had bad manners. I tried to catch them. I set up my phone to record the living room while I was at work. I watched 8 hours of footage on fast forward. The chair never moved. The cup never appeared. It was like the changes only happened when the apartment was unobserved. Then last night I was sitting on the couch, reading a book. The lamp in the corner was on, casting a warm yellow circle over the rug. The room felt safe. I felt my eyes getting heavy. I put the book down on the coffee table. I heard the chair creak. I didn't look up. I told myself it was the building settling. I heard it again. A rhythmic creak. Creak. Pause. Creak. Like someone rocking back and forth. Slowly. I looked at the armchair. It was empty. I looked at the coffee table. My book was gone. I stood up, my heart hammering a hard rhythm against my ribs. I scanned the room. The book wasn't on the floor. It wasn't under the couch. It was just gone. I heard a sound from the kitchen, the sound of a cabinet door opening. The hinge whined. A specific high-pitched whine that I'd been meaning to oil for months. I walked toward the kitchen doorway. I didn't have a weapon. I grabbed a heavy umbrella from the stand by the door. I peered around the frame. The kitchen was dark. The overhead light was off. But the cabinet door under the sink was open. I could see the dark square of the space inside. I reached for the light switch. My finger flipped it up. Nothing happened. The power wasn't out. The fridge was still humming. The bulb was just dead. I stepped into the kitchen. The air smelled like talcum powder and stale breath. I walked to the open cabinet. I looked inside. Sitting in the dark, under the sink, was my book. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to pick it up. But I needed to know. I reached in, my hand trembling. My fingers brushed the cover. It felt warm, like it had been held in human hands for a long time. I pulled it out. The book was open. It was open to a page I hadn't read in years, a scene where the protagonist realizes they are dead. I dropped the book. It landed face up on the linoleum. I looked up. Standing in the doorway to the living room was a silhouette. It was tall, featureless, a cutout of a person made of shadow. It was blocking my exit. I backed up against the counter. I gripped the umbrella. "You read it," the figure said. It didn't have a mouth, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere, vibrating in the floorboards. "You finally read it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. "The ending," the figure said. "Did you like it?" I looked down at the book on the floor. The pages were flipping by themselves, riffling in the draftless air. I looked back at the doorway. The figure was closer. It didn't walk. It just was closer. The distance had been deleted. "I'm not finished yet," I whispered. The figure stopped. The silence rushed back in, filling the room. "Finished?" the figure asked. "Or just discarded?" I looked at the open cabinet. I looked at the chair in the living room. I looked at the cup that wasn't there. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The apartment wasn't haunted. I was the ghost. I was the replay. The person in the doorway was the tenant. And they were trying to get rid of the bug in the system, me. The figure reached out a hand. It was long, too many joints. "You're skipping," it said. I tried to scream, but my voice just glitched, a static hiss of white noise. I woke up on the couch. The lamp was on. The book was in my hand. I was on the page where the protagonist dies. I closed the book. I heard the cabinet door open. I didn't look. Story 3. The corner, the problem with the house isn't the ghosts, it's the geometry. It's a suburban ranch, built in the 80s, long hallways, low ceilings. It should make sense. It should follow the rules of Euclidean space. But lately, it doesn't. It started when I was doing laundry. I walked from the bedroom to the utility room. That's a walk of about 15 steps. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. I was holding a basket of whites. I reached the utility room door. I turned on the light. I realized I had taken 20 steps. I stood there, looking at the washing machine. I walked back to the bedroom, counting carefully. 15 steps. I did it again. Bedroom to utility. 15 steps. I did it a third time. 20 steps. The hallway hadn't gotten longer. The steps hadn't gotten smaller, but the distance had increased. The space was stretching. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was miscounting. I told myself I was tired. But the feeling of the house changed. It felt like it was breathing, expanding and contracting with a slow, tidal rhythm. 2 nights ago, I woke up thirsty. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The kitchen is at the end of the hall. I walked down the hall. I passed the bathroom. I passed the linen closet. I reached the kitchen. I got my water. I turned around to go back to bed. The linen closet was on the wrong side. I froze. The door was now on the left. It had been on the right. The hallway had flipped. I looked at the bathroom door. The hinges were on the other side. I walked back toward the bedroom, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I counted the steps. 5, 6, 7. I walked for a long time. I passed the bathroom again. I passed the linen closet again. I was in a loop. The hallway was a circle now. I stopped running. I stood in the middle of the corridor. The lights were off, but the hallway wasn't dark. It was lit by a gray, sourceless glow that seemed to emanate from the wallpaper itself. "Stop it," I said. "Just stop." The hallway obeyed. It stopped stretching. But then the walls started to lean. They didn't fall over. They just angled inward, like they were trying to get a better look at me. I ran to the bedroom door. It was locked. I never locked the bedroom door. I pounded on it. Let me in." I heard the lock click. It unlocked. I turned the handle and threw myself inside. I slammed the door and locked it. I leaned my back against it, sliding down to the floor. I was in the bedroom. The bed was there. The dresser was there. The window was there. But the window was on the floor. The ceiling was the wall. I scrambled up, looking around. The room had rotated. Gravity was pulling me toward what used to be the wall. I fell against the plaster, landing on what felt like the floor, but was vertically sideways. I crawled toward the bed. I grabbed the sheets. They were soft, normal. I looked up at the ceiling. It was the window. I looked out. I saw the backyard, but it was sideways. The grass was a vertical wall rising up into the sky. The trees were growing horizontally out into the void, and standing in the yard, standing perpendicular to the grass, was a man. He was wearing a suit. He was holding a clipboard. He looked up at the window. He looked right at me. Even though gravity was wrong for me, it was right for him. He stood firmly on the grass. He checked something on his clipboard. "Subject 4, he said. His voice was clear, like he was standing right next to me. Spatial distortion confirmed, initiating compression. He looked at me. "Don't worry," he said. "It'll only hurt for a second." He made a check mark. The room began to shrink. The walls pushed in, not quickly, but steadily. The ceiling pushed down. I screamed, but the sound was crushed out of me as the air pressure spiked. I looked at the man in the suit. He was putting the clipboard in his pocket. He turned and walked away across the vertical grass, vanishing into the haze. The walls touched my nose. I closed my eyes. I woke up in bed. Sunlight was streaming through the window. The window was on the wall. The ceiling was above me. Everything was normal. I sat up. I rubbed my face. I looked at the bedroom door. It was open. On the floor in the hallway was a small yellow sticky note. I got out of bed and walked to it. I picked it up. The handwriting was neat, precise. "Complaint received," it read. "Geometry reset. Have a nice day." I dropped the note. I walked into the kitchen. The hallway was 15 steps long. I poured a cup of coffee. I took a sip. It tasted like talcum powder. I looked at the reflection in the kitchen window. For a split second, the reflection didn't raise the cup. The reflection just stared at me, its eyes wide and terrified. Then it blinked and raised the cup. I took another sip. It tasted fine. I turned on the radio. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties," the DJ said. "Bear with us." I stared at the radio. The dial was between stations, just static. I turned it off. I stood in the quiet kitchen, and for the first time, I noticed that the corners of the room didn't meet at 90 degrees. They were slightly obtuse, blunt, like the room was rounding me up.